So we're going to be in Genesis 22. We're going to look at verses 9 through 19. We know the story of Abraham and one of the fathers of the faith. And we see through his life, God calls him to obedience, and God calls him from just a pagan background, and calls him to a future that is going to be different than anything that he imagined, different than anything that he could have thought his life was headed. In Genesis 22, he's been promised the son that has taken the promise as Abraham is in his 90s, his wife in her 90s. God has promised them a son. They're not seeing it happen. They're losing faith. Sarah, his wife, especially. And then finally they have this son, Isaac. And after a few years that they've had this son, God calls Abraham to do something that seems absolutely impossible for, I think, any of us to do. This story has always been one that has been profound to me. It's always been one that I've tried to put myself in Abraham's position. And after becoming a father, it's that much more relevant of what God is calling Abraham to do, and that much more powerful to me of what God is calling Abraham to do. And in Genesis 22, we see that God is calling Abraham to go up to the mountain. He wants him to come and worship him there. This is actually the first time that we see the word worship in the Scriptures. And Abraham is going up the mountain, and his son Isaac is behind him. And God has called Abraham to go and sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar. And I want to read this account and then see how this applies to our own lives and our everyday situation. So in verse 9 it says, when they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So Abraham has gone up to this mountain to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. And we read this story and we see that as Abraham is laying the wood on the altar and he's bound Isaac, he's raised up his knife, and as he's about to go down and kill his son as the sacrifice, God calls out, he stops Abraham and he provides this ram. And I think for many of us, we can put ourselves in Abraham's position. I'm not sure that I would go that far when God calls me to offer my son as a sacrifice. I can't imagine doing that. I can't imagine being in Abraham's position and the overwhelming grief that must have been in Abraham's heart, because we know that Abraham was walking by faith, he was living by faith, he was doing what God had called him to do. But I think in his human side, even in those moments, he's thinking, God has to do something. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to be able to follow through with this sacrifice, but I want to be obedient to God. I want to do what he's called me to do, but this seems absolutely impossible. And the grief that he must have been experiencing in that, and then when God stops him, and Abraham sees in the thickets a ram that's been provided for him, I can't imagine the overwhelming joy and relief that Abraham was experiencing in those moments. And I think for us, obedience is often more difficult than we like to think it would be. We think everyday obedience are these big decisions that we have to make, whether it's avoiding sin or sharing the gospel with someone or diving into the scriptures or even just being kind to the people around us. And I think obedience is more than this idea of these big everyday moments, but I think it's down into the difficult moments of life. I think God calls us to difficult decisions, and I think He calls us to obedience that can oftentimes be very difficult to do. Um, and what we see here is that Abraham finds relief and he finds joy in the obedience that he has towards God, because at the end of the day, God provided for Abraham, and He provided him in a way that Abraham never would have experienced or known, never would have imagined. But God provided for him, and I think for us, on the other side of our obedience, it looks different, but at the end of the day, we find ourselves in the midst of what God has called us to do, and we find ourselves in a place that is so much better than we could have imagined. We find ourselves on one side of obedience where God calls us to those difficult decisions. He calls us to difficult obedience, and we find ourselves looking at the impossible. We find ourselves looking at, this is just too big of a task. This is just too difficult. This is just too hard. I don't understand how any good can come from me doing this, whatever it is that God is calling us to do. But what we find is on the other side of that, God is faithful, and He provides joy. And it may not look like what we thought it would look like. It may not look like the things that we imagined it would look like. But throughout Scripture, we see that God's faithfulness is far better than we could ever imagine. God's faithfulness is far better than any situation we could place ourselves in. And so I think that that's what Abraham finds when he triumphs over what is likely the most difficult task he's had, at least up to this point in his life. Because I cannot imagine what must have been going through Abraham's mind as his son is laying there on the altar, and he's about to kill his son in obedience to God, trusting that God is going to do something. God is either going to raise this boy from the dead because this is the son of the promise, or God is going to provide something. God is going to work in this. And Abraham said, I just have to be obedient. I just have to be faithful to what God is calling me to do and trust that God is going to be faithful. And I think that sometimes God asks us to walk these difficult paths for two reasons and make these difficult choices. One, I think the destination is far better than we can imagine. Again, on the other side of obedience, we see that God is faithful and finds ourselves far better in far better places than we can ever place ourselves. But I think also the journey will grow us. I don't think that God was testing Abraham to see what God could find out about Abraham. God already knew Abraham's faithfulness. God already knew that Abraham would be willing to do this. I think this was for Abraham's benefit. I think this was so that Abraham could see, this is my faith. This is how big my faith is. This is how strong I can trust God in these moments. And I think that this was probably one of the most significant moments in Abraham's life, because he gets to see his faith. He gets to see how his faith is tested. This was not for God's benefit, certainly for Abraham's benefit, and he grew in this experience. He grew in his faith. He grew in trusting the promises that God is good, that He is faithful, that He loves Abraham. And I think it was encouraging for Abraham to be able to walk away and say, I was willing to go as far as God was calling me to go. Now, we can see throughout Abraham's life that it wasn't always this rosy for him, and it wasn't always the decisions that he made were not always the right decisions. But I think in this moment, this was a defining moment for Abraham. And I honestly think that this is a defining moment for the rest of humanity. Because after this we see that God continues His faithfulness with Abraham. And He promises the generations to come behind Abraham redemption and salvation. And then ultimately we see Christ who comes and offers this for God's people. And I think that it was Abraham's faithfulness in this moment that really had the power to change the world. I think that when you have God's will and man's obedience colliding together, I think that it can be a powerful force in the world for change. It can be a powerful force in the world for the gospel to go forth and for people's faith to be shaken and see who God is. I think we will have seasons of rest where God answers our prayers and He provides in miraculous ways. And I think that when we're obedient in the difficult things, God will honor that. And He'll honor that with moments where we can just rest in who He is. And then there'll be moments where we're spent. Again, God is pouring us out. And then He's refilling us again. And we have to trust that He'll meet those needs as those moments come. And I think in all of this, we find moments of relief and obedience, and I think in moments And I think for Abraham, this was also a moment of humility. To see what he was willing to do, but to see how good God is. And also to see that the sacrifice didn't rest on Abraham. That God was willing to provide for Abraham for his sacrifice. That God was willing to do something. The weight of what was on him was huge. To offer his son. But God provided for him in incredible ways. So I think for us, and for us to take away from this, is that God is going to call us to difficult things. And I think in every day we're going to have these decisions that oftentimes seem very difficult. And in front of us seem absolutely impossible. But on the other end of that, we see God's faithfulness. And we see that He is so good and loves us so deeply. And He cares about the things that we care about. Abraham cared about his son. And God cared about Abraham's son. And so God provided for Abraham. So in that, let's pray and close this out. Father, we thank you for the moments that we have to be obedient to you. We thank you for the moments that we have to, God, just to find ourselves in the midst of your will. And so, Father, I pray that even for our staff here, that as difficult times may come, the decisions that we have to make for ourselves, for our church, for our families, God, some of those times it can be so difficult. But God, may we trust in your faithfulness. May we trust that you love us, you love our families, you love people in this church. And God, may we find ourselves caring about the things that you care about, loving the things that you love, and trusting that you care for us in our lives. And may we find your faithfulness in our obedience. In Jesus' name, amen.